With my Iron Warriors Terminator army project getting to about 3,000 points, I, like many other hobbyists around this time of the year, started browsing the Games Workshop website looking for inspiration for my next project. After seriously considering a Squig-centric Age of Sigmar army, I took a step back and realized that I have way too many half-completed projects already cluttering up my closet, and it would be insane to spend more money when I already have years worth of projects just sitting right here in front of me. So, instead of adding even more to my hoard, I decided that this year I would fight back against the consumerism-driven marketing campaign of New Year, New Army, and instead decided to renew an army that had been languishing in my closet for nearly 20 years. Back in 2003, Games Workshop launched their global Eye of Terror campaign, and with it, an accompanying codex. While the campaign and codex Eye of Terror probably deserve an entire video on their own, what I remembered most fondly is that the codex contained 4 supplementary army lists, which all brought an interesting and lore-driven take on established armies. These were Craftworld Ulthwi Eldar, Cadian Imperial Guard, 13th Company Space Wolves, and my favorite, the Lost and the Damned. This army list was a converter's dream, as it represented the dregs of humanity led by their Chaos Space Marine overlords. It was kind of centered on a core of either traitor guard or mutants, but there were a ton of Chaos oddities thrown in, like big mutants and Spawn. The dizzying array of customizations, combined with not really being any official models for these non-Chaos Space Marine units, made it the perfect list for an aspiring conversion nut like myself. I immediately jumped right on this army, and picked up the newly released Cadian Battle Force to start off my horde of degenerates who had turned from the light of the Emperor. While I could have been content with simply scraping off the Imperial Aquillas and calling it a day, I thought it would be pretty sick to give them all custom flak armor, a sculpted, fleshy belly, and gas masks. Looking at these models now, they look a little rough, but I was super happy with them at the time and managed to assemble a small force, which was quite impressive for me, as back then I jumped around from army to army like crazy. Fast forward to today, and I still have this small army, but never really given it much attention after the Eye of Terror campaign was over. I really had no desire to sculpt some more of these kind of wonky gas masks, and as the additions of 40k moved on and the Lost and the Damned army list was left behind, this small force of traitor guardsmen was left in my closet. Jumping back in time again, this time only 13 years to 2010, Forge World had just released Imperial Armor Volume 9, The Badab War Part 1. If you're not familiar with this section of 40k lore, I'd highly recommend you check out some of the amazing videos out there on the topic, such as the series by Oculus Imperia. The one pertinent thing that came out of this book was the Tyrant Legion's army list, which, much like the Lost and the Damned list from 7 years before, combined mortal units with Space Marines in one cohesive army. I had this rather dumb 60-second recap of the events leading up to the Badab War to explain what the Tyrants Legion was and how it came to be, but it's pretty cringy, and I'm actually not a great scriptwriter, so I'll just leave it as this force existed so the Astral Class Space Marine chapter could hide their true numbers by attaching their Marines to local PDF forces and private armies. Honestly though, there are a bunch of other YouTubers out there that explain lore far better than I can, and I'll throw some links to my favorite videos on the Badab War in the description down below. When the book was released, I was immediately drawn to the Tyrants Legion and found it to be really cool, but I was in college at the time, not spending too much of my energy on Warhammer. Like many of the Forge World-based army lists, the Tyrants Legion disappeared with the transition into 40k 8th edition. And with that disappearing, so did my desire to build an army of them. Hopping back to 2023 once again, a couple of mad Australian lads decided to recently rewrite the entire Badab War into a supplement for the new edition of the Horus Heresy, including a new imagining of the Tyrants Legion list. So with this old army, and a brand new rule set to use them with, I decided to give these nearly drinking-aged models a new lease on life. While the green stuff detailing was fairly cool to past fill, the fleshy stomach thing would not fit in the Tyrants Legion look I'm going for now, and I really couldn't remove this without tearing apart the gas mask. Luckily, all the green stuffed items pretty much popped right off of the model, and I was able to pry the heads off with minimal damage. I did have to keep the sculpted, slab-like chest armor, and for the most part was fairly successful. As I had no replacement Cadian heads though, I decided to use these Chem Mask heads from Victoria Miniatures that I had stashed away for a potential Chem Dog conversion video in the future. These heads are a little smaller than the truly massive noggins that come with a Cadian sprue, but I actually like the proportions better using these. They are resin though, and a bit of a pain to clip off their sprue, but overall, I found that they gave my models a pretty distinct look with minimal work. All in all, it took me maybe 2 minutes per model to remove the green stuff and add these heads. While I'm not sure if this is longer or shorter than it would take building models from scratch, I found the process way more enjoyable as I did not really have to worry about mold lines or ensuring that the arms lined up correctly. 13-year-old me already did all that work. And while of course the effort it takes at this step depends on how well or poorly the old models were constructed, this is definitely a plus for me in refurbishing old armies as opposed to buying new ones. When it came to painting these guys, I knew that I wanted a fairly easy scheme that I could quickly reproduce. Much like an Imperial Guard army, the Tyrants Legion list can have a ton of dudes in it, so I needed to be able to knock out a ton of models quickly and not get bored. This means that more advanced techniques, or ones that take longer to set up, like airbrushing or glazing, are not going to work here, and instead, I'll have to lean on easier things like dry brushing and contrast paints. To start with, I gave the entire model a pretty generous dry brush of scale 75 graphite, making sure that all of the cloth was nicely covered. For this, I'm using some cheap makeup brushes that I picked up from the local drugstore, and I'm not too concerned about being sloppy here, as any misplaced paint will be fixed later on. Also, while I'm going for a black and gray scheme for these models, the process I used here will work for pretty much any Imperial Guard scheme you're trying to paint quickly. So, I don't know, ignore the colors or use whatever you want and just kind of follow along with the techniques I'm trying to show. Next up, I layer on graphite on all the armor plates to ensure a nice base layer and to remove any of the weird streaks that sometimes occur when dry brushing flat surfaces. As many of you might know, I really don't like edge highlighting and instead prefer to use sponge chipping to create texture and define the edges of my models. So for these guys, I start by sponge chipping on some black to represent gouges in the armor, and then some scale 75 Nakar to better define the edges. While I was pretty happy with how the armor was turning out, I felt that it was a bit bland and wanted to add an accent color of blue to better tie these models into my Astral Claws force visually. For these visual stripes, I start off by applying a base coat of Cantabaric blue and then Tesla blue, both from scale 75. Again, I'm not too concerned with neatness here, or even consistency really, as I next sponge on some more graphite gray over the stripe. By using the base color in this way, it looks like the top layer of blue paint is chipping, and the gray underneath is showing through. Again, adding a little more visual interest without a ton of work. The one problem with sponging sometimes is there are going to be a couple places that you can't easily reach with your sponge, such as the chest pieces behind their weapons here. But this was easily fixed by just stippling on a little bit of Nakar around the edges of the armor and across the surface to add some more dings and scrapes. For the black fatigues, all I did was paint on a layer of Black Templar contrast paint from Games Workshop. I find that contrast paint is amazing for painting over more organic areas, such as this cloth, and it really helps to smooth out the rough dry brushing from before. I also found that by doing this step after the sponging of the armor, any misplaced paint is easily covered up. After that, all that was really left was the skin and other small details, such as the gas mask and other metallic pieces. Again, I went for speed here, and painted the skin in a very simple scheme of pale skin by scale 75, Gilliman contrast paint, and another layer of pale skin once more. This won't win me any painting competitions, but it's easy enough and looks good from across the table. Finally, I based the models to match my Astral Claws by dry brushing a couple of browns over the textured paint and liberally applying Tamiya snow effects. After about a week of refurbishing and repainting, I ended up getting 30 models finished. I'm really happy with how this project is going so far, and it's nice seeing my old models get a new look. What's kind of crazy though, is that these 30 guys are only about 200 points in this army, so I have a long way to go if I want to get a fully painted 2000 point force. I do have a mortar squad to finish up still, and a couple more random bodies to use, but I'll need to figure out how to trade or buy some more secondhand models to keep building out this army, particularly tanks. In the meantime though, I have this other ancient box in my closet that I'm hopeful will contain something to help me figure out my HQ choice to lead this army. But that will be for a future video in this series. Also, I am planning to do some more Badab War kitbashes, as I said before, I'm super into this new rule set. And I'm going to start off using this guy as a base, but I'm not really sure what chapter to make him for, so leave a comment on what you'd like to see below. Thank you all for watching, and I hope you like this slightly different take on a video as opposed to being just a pure tutorial. Of course, I'm going to do more of those in the future, but I did enjoy this more, narrative aspect of video making, so hope you enjoyed it too. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll be on.